he's more than that. He helped company like IDOS get Lara Croft really going. He's helped gigantic artists become part of the digital space when it comes to gaming. He's a super sharp guy. By the way, I think that's a pretty good poster. You like that one, Keith? I like that. And I'm honored to have Keith join us today. And Keith's going to talk about data behind the matrix. Let's give it up for Mr. Keith Boesky, everyone.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here at Intimidation Fest 15. The last time I was at Metal, so we start up and we get somebody who starts out by, okay, next week, for those of you who wasted your time this week listening to Keith, we've got a guy who raised $7 million in his sleep. He was only trying for 10,000. We got 7 million. You can see him next week. Don't worry, come back. Special guest appearance by the most creative man on the planet, just to come in and throw down. And then we have somebody standing up to build a Hyperloop. We have Lizanne, okay, in my spare time while I haul my kids around and build a $300 million business. And then we have a kid return from the dead to play a song. And now between that and lunch, you got me. I was excited to be here. I was excited to share this. 23 years of experience in the game business that's been congealing in the refrigerator of my brain like beef fat that's going to be heated up for you and given back. And we're showing the matrix because I want to talk about big data. Oh yeah, let's throw that in. A guy wrote a book about the shit I'm making up. I'm going to do it anyways. Because my wife still thinks I'm smart, and I'll tell her that I spoke here, and she thinks Ken is really smart. So when we look at big data, we see a big cloud of mess right now. But by the time that I'm done, and see, you're already starting to see that there's meaning inside the data. And I call it the dawn of the behavioral engineer. And behavioral engineering is something that I'm applying to game designers to give meaning to my life of creating adolescent male empowerment fantasies. And it's something that I've seen because I have a brilliant grasp of the obvious, and I'm very proud of it. And none of you should be intimidated by the grasp of the obvious. And it's the thing that's standing right in front of you that we're afraid to talk about, and we're afraid to bring it up. And it may be that I think that games are the answer because it's the only thing that I know after 23 years of working in them as a lawyer, as a game publisher, as an agent. But there are other smart people who agree with me. So going off the stage here, so John C. Brown says that he would hire a Warcraft guy. And when you look at that, you say that you know the person that he's talking about, and it's really lucky for this guy, because he's obviously going to get a job, but it's not for you. But it really is for you, and there's more that we can learn for it. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to set the table, I'm going to explain to you what a game is. I'm going to walk you through this process that's kind of scary inside my head, but it should be easier for you because I'm going to do it on a linear path. And then I'm going to make it so that by the time we leave, you're going to be able to see everything as a game, and you're going to see where big data comes in. If there was a monitor, I could see what it is without turning around and being rude. So the first thing is, what's a game? A game is just a goal that you set that's achievable within a rule set and with feedback. So it tells you how close you're getting. So if you think about a game that way, every game that you're playing is just your achievement to the goal and telling you how close you're getting to it. And the way that we deal with it in video games is we manage massive amounts of data. If any of you were dungeon masters or something like that on D&D, you know you were looking at what people are doing, you're adding up points, you're rolling the dice. We just do it with computers. I put this one up. This is a little bit old, but Zynga at its peak on Farmville was managing a petabit of data a day just for Farmville. And down here on the bottom, we're going to be pushing out 8 zettabytes of data a day by the end of this year. And the way that we do it is we visualize it. We use advanced tools, analytic tools, to visualize everything that everybody's doing in a game. And you can see there's a heat map in the middle, and it's telling you the different actions that are going on in a game. And if we left it and we stopped right there, we would be where the real world is. But we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing it for, I don't know, no, it's 1972. That goes back. So what we do is we use that data and we look at it to give feedback to the players. And feedback makes everything better. If you're taking the garbage out, your feedback is how close are you to the curb? That's better. I'm halfway there. And the feedback gives you a little dopamine pop. And the dopamine pop makes you happy, and you go back, like a slot machine. That's what Zynga was doing. But the other thing that we can do is we can start to reach out to the community. We can make them feel better, the players, and we can tell them that we care about them and make them feel important. This is something Nike sent out to the Volt runners, the highest level runners, 800 people in the program, and they actually got something in the mail. I got something in the mail that made me want to tell you that I got something in the mail from Nike. I was one of only 800 and something people. And that's called the Hawthorne effect. There was an experiment that was done in a laboratory back in the 30s, so in the 20s and 30s, in the Western Electric plant. And what they did is they wanted to see how employees react to lighting. So they went out and they turned the lights up, and production went up. And they turned the lights down, and production went up. And they turned the lights back up again, and production went up. And they turned the lights off, and production went up. And they looked at it and they said, why? And it's because employees thought that management cared about them. And if they feel that people care about them through feedback, if we feel that people care, then we feel like we're part of a community. We're part of something. We're not standing alone. So now the next step that we take in games, I like to call behavioral engineering. Whenever you're playing a game, you think that you may be making your own decisions. If you're playing something like Grand Theft Auto that some of you may have played, you may think that you can go anywhere in the game, but you really can't. And we learned early on that if we tell a story on a bubble, this is a quest that was happening when games were called multimedia. If we tell a story on a bubble, people don't have fun. People want to be led. So what we want to do is we want to make people think that they have options where they're going, but bring them back to the point that we want to do it. Because if we don't, they get bored, and we don't want bored gamers. So if you're playing a game, some of you may be familiar with this. This is Destiny. And if I look at this in Destiny, you may start playing that a little bit, you may walk a little bit, but what are you going to do? You're going to turn around. There's nothing going on. So the easy way that we deal with this is we load it up with characters. And we use those analytics, we use the heat maps, we see what people are doing, and if they're not doing the right thing, we'll give them some kind of cue to go in the other direction. And that's something that's obvious. There we go. And sometimes we'll use the power of suggestion. We'll get right in there into your subconscious mind, and we'll start to manipulate you, behaviorally engineer you, using your data, seeing what you're doing. And you may have seen this from my talk before. This is one of my favorite ones. So now we have a data set. The data set is that people are peeing on the floor and splashing on the walls. So what can we do to make it so that people don't pee on the floor and splash on the walls? Well, if I get into the subliminal level and I do it right, then I can put something in there and you're just going to start aiming. Does anybody know how much that helps in that urinal? How much more effective it makes the urinal? If you were here before, you knew? Nobody listened to me last time? 85%. And nobody told you anything. There's not an instruction set. This is even greater than Nolan's use the paddle to hit the ball instruction set. There's no instruction set. You don't have to learn anything. We just told you how to do it. And as a game designer, somebody had to figure it out. We had to know where to put it. We had to know where to put it to make it effective. We had to know where to put it to make you care and make sure that you use it. And nobody's unhappy with this, because what we found out is that people are happier with fewer choices. Somebody was talking about TED. There are a bunch of TED Talks about happiness and choices, and this is Barry Schwartz. And the fewer choices we give you, the happier you are. And what we found out with games is that if we make you feel like you have a lot, you're happier still. And we saw this with the iPhone. We see it now with the iPhone and Android. I saw Steve Wozniak, and I asked him if the iPhone is really just the new version of the Newton. And he said no. He said because the Newton learned you, and you learned the iPhone. And the reason people like iPhones better than Android is when you're using an iPhone, you think you can customize, but you can't. You can do what Apple wants you to think is customization. Now, the Android phone, you can customize to your heart's content. You know what happens? Nobody buys apps. Nobody cares. Because people get confused. And like the last slide said, it's homework. So now these are all games, and when I look at the world, I see these as all games, and these are companies that are using analytics to keep you doing what you want to do. Amazon, you're part of a community, just like I said. You're accountable to other people, and you're giving reviews to be a part of a community to have status. Same thing with Kickstarter. We talked about some crowdfunding today. If you look at Kickstarter and the way that it gets funded, people fund to be recognized for the projects that they choose to fund. They fund in clans. They don't fund individually. You go out, you get a guild leader, and they put in a marker of $1 to track and see what's going on. Look how smart I am. I'm a backer. And if people think that I'm cool for backing, I'll put in more later as the thing is closing out. Uber answers your first question. Where's the closest car? They know what your question is. They anticipate it. They're engaging you. They're making you happy. In the real world, we haven't had access to this data. So we've got a 50-year lead in games over the real world. But now, all of a sudden, that was Peter Drucker, we made up for that lack of data by doing silly things like focus groups. Let's go into focus groups and figure out, we'll make up data to make ourselves feel better. Nielsen? Does anybody believe in Nielsen? There are 1,000 people out there keeping a written diary that are telling me what I watch on television? These things are starting to fall apart because they're made up data. And some of our greatest entrepreneurs told us that data doesn't matter. Henry Ford and Steve Jobs both said it. And Henry Ford was right, and he was successful with his cars until he wasn't. He ignored the data. He ignored the people. So it's not the flawed focus group. It's the flawed access to the data. And Steve Jobs didn't really say that focus groups don't work. He said they're hard. And now this is a nice way. This is what he said on record. And behind closed doors, he said it was because people lie. So when he was launching the iMac, he said that the survey said that the number one reason to buy a computer or to upgrade a computer is for work, and the number two reason was games, and he said people lie. Because he looked at the data and he saw that this is what we're doing with it. Unless you're making Jurassic Park, why are you buying a new computer? I can surf the web, I can do it. And he went into games, and he supported games. And the thing that he did, he said that the most important book that he read was Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, and he saw the emerging market. And when he saw that emerging market the next time, he used existing technology to address it. So he saw that people were buying more music than ever before. They were paying more money for music than ever before, but they were paying for it in bandwidth, in hard drives, in computers. And he consolidated a lot. Because remember when the iPod came out and we all thought it was kind of silly because Creative Labs owned the MP3 space? Anybody remember Creative Labs? That owned the MP3 space that Apple couldn't knock off with the silly music thing? iPod was existing technology. iTunes was existing technology. And he used it to address an emerging market that he was able to see. So now we've got data that's coming in from more places than ever before. Our lives, our world is starting to look like we have in video games. And the advantage that we have, that I have, well, if I actually did it and I wasn't just a suit, but the advantage that the gamers has is we've been dealing with this data for a long time. I was talking to Nolan about this earlier, and I'm excited about it. So Kary Mullis won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the pcRNA, polymerase something, something, something. It's the thing that tells you, it's the test for prostate cancer. And Kary had this theory about HIV and AIDS, because he couldn't find any research that showed that HIV was connected to AIDS. And what he said is that there are a whole bunch of viruses out there that we don't see. But when we find a virus that we can identify, we get excited about it, and we attach meaning to it and essentially businesses to it because we can see it and we don't see the others. The same thing is going on with data right now. We're starting to scratch the surface of the data that we can have, and we're ascribing value to it. Incidentally, Kary gave me the greatest piece of advice that I've ever received when he told me, when you receive your Nobel Prize, and I appreciate that because he gave it a when, not an if. When you receive your Nobel Prize, don't ask the King of Sweden if his daughter's available. And I'm not going to do that. So in 2002, Canadian Tire discovered that if they start to track people's purchases, they can start to identify whether they're creditworthy. And the type of items that they were buying would indicate whether it was worthwhile extending them credit. Now we're starting to use beacon technology to identify where people are in the real world. All these are little devices. You see, they're not in scale. You can see the little ones the size of a quarter. Those are near frequency, and some of you guys may know about this. But what it does is it tells your phone that your wall is here, then the server, then your phone communicates with the server to give a location of where you are. So we've got data about where you are. We've got Google completely independent of Beacon. I don't know if you know this, but this came out last week. You can go to this website down here on the bottom, and you can see where Google knows where you are. So Google is keeping data from where you check in with your Gmail and where you check in with a Google browser and the different things that you do. So Google has that pool of data. Samsung Smart TVs, a story came out this week. Ken reads Business Insider, so he probably saw this one, where Samsung said that, not to concern you guys, but when you're talking in front of your TV, we're listening. And we may sell it to third parties. And they figured out that that was a bad thing, and that's not really good when it comes to corporate communications. So they corrected it, and they said, you can turn off the Wi-Fi. And that's not the only thing we're capturing. So if you look at this, that camera that's on your Samsung television can capture your emotion. And this is on your Xbox right now, and it's on your Samsung television. It's just a software update. So if you look on the side, think about what CNN does with those polls. And when they're serving you commercials right now, we're talking about different companies that are looking for the commercials to serve you. They can look at your face and they can tell whether you're happy or not, whether you're getting upset with the commercial.
Designing an effective legislative strategy
This is a
is
new
like
company
doing a puzzle.
that just won the Harvard
But it's
Business
tough
Award.
to do a puzzle without all the pieces. That's where Quorum comes in. Quorum is an online legislative strategy platform with over 800 million data points on the 535 members of Congress, calculated from votes, bills, press releases, floor statements, tweets, and demographic statistics. But Quorum does more than just give you access to all this data. It lets you sort, filter, and connect the pieces to help you make more informed decisions. Map, compare, and explore thousands of demographic statistics for each of the 435 districts. Refine your legislative targeting with lists of each member's top issues and most frequent collaborators. Easily combine filters to conduct advanced full-text searches of all congressional tweets, press releases, statements, and bills. Compare different versions of bills and create legislative scorecards based on votes and co-sponsorships. With Quorum, you can be sure that when you make a decision, you'll have all the pieces you need to see the whole picture.
So in theory, this is making you smarter, and we feel really good about that. It's giving you information, tying things together. But the thing that it's not telling you, and the thing that we have to be conscious of, but it's also something that empowers us, is that as we marry these data sets, we get more powerful. So this is a picture of Watson. And this is how Watson works. Are you familiar with anybody familiar with Watson? Anybody not? So Watson's a supercomputer. It won on Jeopardy. It beat chess champions. And what Watson does is when a query comes in, it compares it against its database, and it determines what the best answer is. That's an oversimplified version, something that I can understand of how Watson works. So the more data that comes in, the smarter Watson gets. So Watson wants data sets. And when we start to marry data sets, they get smarter. I'm not making this up like a Ken salacious picture that he just puts in there. That is Cortana. If you have a Windows phone, this is the woman that you're talking to. I don't know who you're talking to when you're talking to Siri, but this is Cortana. And the scary thing about putting these data sets together is that the data, the information, the understanding of the individual gets more and more granular as the data sets are married. So this is a quote from Satya Nadella. And I don't know how you guys feel about it, but when he says that the computer's getting smarter and we don't know why, and his only answer to it, his technical answer, I think that's a term of art, is it's magical. It's right down here on the bottom. His best answer for why does Cortana get smarter in one language, it's magical. We don't know why. And it kind of makes me think that this guy may be right. And maybe we should start to get concerned about the data. That's a whole nother talk. So we put the data together and we start to see patterns. And now, just like we did in games, we can start to see patterns that we never saw before. Just like Carrie Mull is talking about viruses, we're seeing patterns that didn't exist. And seeing patterns is good because that's the way that we think. As human beings, we start to understand things by looking for a pattern. How is this familiar? How do I put a group together? How do I keep it collected? And we identify with patterns, and we can't hide familiar patterns in different objects. And some of you may have picked out the woman lying down here in the middle. Here's a camouflage guy in the wall. Did anybody see the one up in the top? You see that? And what you're seeing is you're seeing the patterns in the background, and you can pick out the pattern because the pattern of a human being is so familiar to you that we can't camouflage it, and we're putting it in. And when we gather patterns together and we give them, that turns into what we call wisdom. These are the old guys, because if you talk to somebody like me closing in on my 50th year, the only thing we're doing is pattern recognition as we talk to people. And it's useful until we hit a wall. Because now we're taking all of this data, we're taking these patterns, we're taking these wonderful things, and we're using them like we used before. If I have a box of Tide, I'm taking a box of Tide and I get the data of what's happening in real time, because there's a great company here in Toronto called Instantly, just got funded, based in Encino. And what they do is they take the real-time data of what's going on in the store and they give it to the store. And here's a real-time story of Dannon Yogurt that was taking in information about what was happening with Greek yogurt, and by the time they were able to respond, they had lost. So now, if we go back to the innovator's dilemma, and we say, here's an emerging market. The emerging market is data, big data. Steve Jobs' favorite book, it must be good, it worked for Apple. So the big data market is emerging. Is there a technology that we can use to help us to understand this market and to be better and take advantage of it? And it probably shouldn't be a big surprise when I'm standing here on the stage the way Ken introduces to me. I think it comes from games. The first time we did something like this, Trip Hawkins was playing a very, very complicated football trading card game, and nobody would play it with him. It was too hard to play. They didn't want to play. They didn't want to sit and think about it. So he put a game engine on top of it, had the game do the thinking. It became Madden Football and became very successful. And I appreciate all of you hanging in here and listening to me and talking about games, because Madden Football doesn't mean anything in your lives. But some of you may remember having to build spreadsheets like this. When I started working, there were people that were still doing it like this. And what would happen is you go through this whole thing all day long, and then at 5 o'clock your boss would come in and say, okay, this widget is a nickel more. And you're up all night. And then all of a sudden a guy named Dan Bricklin came along, and he put a game engine on top of a spreadsheet. That's all it is. It's a game engine. And it revolutionized the world. Now everybody uses Excel, and VisiCalc is the thing that actually made Apple more than Steve Jobs, is what made Apple Apple. Now we're dealing in the real world, and we got a whole bunch of this data coming off of us. Some of you may be wearing these bands. We've got quantified self data. So we got this quantified self data, and if I wear these things, if I wear a Fitbit, it's going to tell me you slept 4 hours last night, you should have slept 8. And then tomorrow it'll say, you slept 4 hours last night, you should have slept 8. And the next day, you slept 4 hours, and you should have slept 8. And then I take it off and say, fuck you. I'm done. But if we start, instead of the static data, if we start to apply some of the more obvious tricks that we use from games, we get something like this.
Run a 5, get going.
Collected a bottle of water, a radio and a box of batteries. 2.4 kilometers, 17 minutes.
Zombies attacked a nearby farmhouse. The survivors are on the roof. We can't just leave them there to die.
Five kilometers, 29 minutes.
That's it. You lost them. Come on home, Runner 5. You're one step closer to saving the world.
Okay, so now if you think about that, instead of the Fitbit band, let's go back and review. Goal, feedback, rule set, accountability. Accountability, making us a member of a community. So instead of getting something from somebody saying you ran this far or somebody else saying you didn't run, I just saved 5 people running away from the zombies. And that's real. That's in the story. You can download that today. So why doesn't everybody do it? This is our definition of play. This is how people look at play. This is how we look at work. That's where we put our value. Now, why would we favor work over play? Because we know that play is bad when work is available. In the meantime, a kid will pick up Pokemon, and if Ken let his kids play, you may know about this. Right now, Ken knows this from Clash of Clans because he can tell me what all the different character attributes are. The kid will learn 15,000 characters of Pokemon and be very happy and happily do it. So why are they accepting it so easily? If you look at the attributes of play and the attributes of flow, play can actually put you into a flow state, and the flow state opens up your brain to more learning. Steven Kotler says that if you move into a flow state, he wrote a book, The Rise of Superman, talking about it, if you can put yourself into a flow state, you can be more effective at work. I know that what I'm saying has some value because Steven Kotler himself told me that he doesn't think it's an entirely shitty idea. And he told me that this is not an entirely shitty idea. So how do we take this from people working because they have to turning work, education, learning into Candyland? It's really easy. Daniel Pink says we provide people with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And again, look at the tools that we have. We have the data of how you're performing. We can tell you exactly where you stand. We can direct you into something where we know you're going to succeed. That's what we do in games. When you're playing an arcade game, we know you have to get through the first level in 45 seconds. We know you can't fail more than 3 times, and we have to tune the game to do that. So why don't we tune your life to do that? And then we give you control. Because now we have the data to be able to do it. So here's some examples. If we look in the real world, this is a heat map from a game. This is another heat map because I knew I was speaking at Metal. And in Ken's theory of men and women, you can see where the men look, you can see where the women look. Apparently women are better readers than men because they're focusing on the words over there. This is a heat map for a shopping center. This barely exists. The #1 tourist attraction in the state of California is the Grove. 22 million people a year walk through the Grove. And when I sat down and I talked to Caruso and I said, who are they? I don't know. Where's the first person they go when they walk into the mall? I don't know. Well, what would you like to do? We would like to have an app so that a woman would be able to create a wish list and take a picture of a hang tag without broadcasting her size. And another app to pay for parking would be cool too. Okay, well, forward thinking, I guess. But we can use beacon technology to create these heat maps because now what happens if the Grove knows where you're going, the Grove knows when you're there, the Grove that sells advertising is able to tell you, person who's seen 3 movies in the past month, that there's a movie you like opening up in 20 minutes. What's the CPM on that? Well, there's a company in San Diego called AppMetrics, and I tried to make it through an entire presentation without a picture of Nolan, without mentioning him, but when I went to the page to capture the fact that this game company has Gimbal in the middle, Nolan's picture was on there. So thank you, Nolan. But if you look at that, you see, okay, I got game, Gimbal. Well, why Gimbal? Well, Gimbal is Qualcomm's beacon technology. It's a company that Qualcomm spun out. And this is where they put things in the real world. And the AppMetrics back end that shows people what's going on, and you can see the data in real time, was used at the Super Bowl last year and this year. It gave Verizon an opportunity to give people different angles of view, serve ads, and make them happy. But more importantly, when we're talking about the Hawthorne effect, making people feel like you care, like the NFL cares, special VIPs at the All-Star game for Major League Baseball and the NFL last year got a notice that said, hey, we got some empty floor seats. I know it wasn't either one of those games. I'm not a big sports guy. I know it's not a floor seat at a football game, but we got floor seats for you, and it makes you feel special. So what am I doing? I'm picking out my whale, and I'm making them happy so they grow into be a bigger whale. In the real world, using real world data and video game tricks. Hospitality and CRM. Anybody get upset when they check into a hotel? Frustrating experience? You get there in the middle of the night, you travel a lot. The people who get most upset are the ones who travel a lot, who don't have the service. There's a company called Hanson Robotics that's making these robots. David Hanson started at Disneyland. They're making these robots that are super humanoid robots. There aren't a lot of people focusing on the face. but they're focusing on that. Two interesting applications are elder care and also autistic children. Autistic children can show dramatic improvement if you start to work with facial expressions and emotions when they're very young, but you have to give them 30 to 40 minutes a week, and that's expensive for people and they can't do it. Robots can help. More significantly, for this presentation, the CEO told me that they're meeting with hotel chains right now, and the first thing you say is, I don't want to come in and talk to a robot. And then I thought about how happy I was when Bank of America adopted Versatellers and I never had to talk to a bank teller again. But what that robot's going to do, it's going to identify your face, identify your account, go back to a database to tell the night manager that they should focus on you, kind of a Walmart greeter. And they have all of your data available, so they're doing the analytics in your head and the behavioral engineering to say, how do we treat this person? How do we make them happy? So you may see robots checking you in and be really happy about it soon. Craig Ellen, who's part of Metal, who couldn't be here today, is working with something called the Infusionarium. This is just a game as a distraction, but lets data be collected better. So this is in Children's Hospital of Orange County. They put this installation in, again, with some ex-Disney guys from Imagineering. When children are being infused, they're able to play games. On the other side of it, Pam Omidyar, Pierre Omidyar's wife, and Hope Labs put together a game called Remission. This went through FDA trials, and it showed efficacy in treating teen cancer. So kids are able to visualize the cancer cells, and then you're able to track and make them accountable for staying on their regimen. Consulting, the second to last example. This is what happens when McKinsey comes in. When McKinsey comes in, if anybody's ever hired them, they come in and they tag your KPIs, your key performance indicators, and they'll put together one of these things. And they'll charge you $1 million or more, and they'll give you that at the end of the day. And now what are you standing with? A bunch of static data. Well, what happens now if we take that data and we put it into a game format? So now I can go in, I can get people playing the game. This is just a simple simulation, but it gets more powerful than that. And I was just talking to Nolan about this earlier too with Appmetrics. So remember what I said about data sets getting smarter? What happens if McKinsey, instead of saying, here are your KPIs, nice to see you, they stay in and they say, we'll give you real-time data. Well, the first thing, like Caruso, is they say, we don't want our real-time data. Okay, good, I'll do it for you. Give me a service contract. I've changed consulting from Oracle to Salesforce, consulting as a service. It's impossible for those companies to switch because I've got their data. And they'll stay with me. But every data set that I get from even unrelated companies makes my company smarter, makes my data set smarter. So I think there's a big shift that's going to happen there. And now management is really exciting to me. And this is one where IBM is actually working, and they're using Watson. And this is one of the areas I told Ken about this a while ago on his show. So right now, when you have an employee evaluation, the employee comes in every 6 months, and you sit down with an evaluation, and you say, this is good, this is bad, and I want you to make it better. And if you think about every single issue with any employee that you've ever had, or any employer that you've ever had, it's always been because you didn't know where you stand. I have no feedback. I have no feedback on what I'm doing. Am I doing well? Am I doing not? I got to wait for 6 months, and I got to go in and have that review. What IBM is doing is they're making a role-playing game, and it makes a lot of sense. A 5th grader in California knows that if they get 100 points in a class, they'll get an A, and they know what they have to do to get points. A director at IBM doesn't know what they have to do to become a vice president. So at IBM, they're saying, okay, let's have a role-playing game. Here are the skill sets that you have to learn to achieve that next level, to achieve the next rung on the ladder of success. And the thing that they found that's really interesting, and this is something that came out in the Fold-It project, and I talked about this one here before too. The Fold-It project was where they created a game to fold genomes, and they were able to discover an HIV question, to answer an HIV question that researchers studied for 10 years. 10 days, they answered it. #1 gene folder in the world, actually she was #2, I'm exaggerating, was a managed care worker in Manchester, England, in her 60s. Oh, there she is. So what they did is you're able to identify somebody who was non-obvious. And what's happening now with the program that IBM is putting into place is you can look at it and you can say, this employee is not a shitty employee, they're just in the wrong role. So if I can take that good person who's developed these skill sets on their own and move them over to this more useful place, then I can have a good employee and there's somebody that's worth retaining. So the whole point is that we've got a lot of data that we've never had before. We've got an industry that's been working with a lot of data. We've got an industry that matured enough to be able to take real-time data and deliver back in real-time data. And I think there's a great opportunity to move that into the real world and to be able to solve a lot of problems that are coming up. Thank you.